Hi, my name is Lorne Brown. I'm a doctor of traditional Chinese medicine, clinical hypnotherapist, and I'm the clinical director of Acubalance Wellness Center in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. I wanted to give you a brief introduction before you watch the interview that I did with Jill Blakeway. Jill Blakeway's latest book is called Energy Medicine. She's also the author of Making Babies. And I'm really excited to introduce Jill and her book to you. And again, that title is Energy Medicine, the Science and Mystery of Healing. And the reason I'm looking forward to this interview and to share this book with you is because it seems like now, as of 2019, science is really starting to be able to demystify the mystical experiences people have talked about, and as well as what people are calling energy healing, or what I like how Bruce Lipton calls it. He's the author of Biology of Beliefs, energy psychology. And so in my practice, I like to combine and integrate acupuncture and laser therapy and Chinese herbal medicine, as well as with energy psychology, to help people remove those limiting beliefs, those programs, and to help them lay down or reprogram new beliefs that will help them both heal in body and mind. Some of these energy psychology techniques are known as EFT, emotional freedom technique. There's Psyche, hypnotherapy, heart coherence, medical Qigong, the Bankside healing method. And these are all techniques that I use in my practice to support my clients in, again, helping them heal their mind so they can heal their bodies. A recent case that I like to share is a woman that had sciatica, which we usually treat really effectively at Acubalance, using acupuncture, laser, and sometimes cupping, 1 to maybe 3 treatments, and we can usually resolve the pain and symptoms associated with sciatica. In this case, she wasn't seeing resolution. She would have a treatment, have a couple hours relief, and then it would come back. And over a 2-week period, having about 6 sessions, she just wasn't able to maintain that relief. And again, that's not the norm that we see in our clinic. So I invited her in for more of an energy psychology session. And over a half an hour with her together, without using any acupuncture, any laser, nothing done on the sciatica, we did some energy psychology type treatments. And within that 30 minutes, her sciatica vanished, and 4 months to this date, she still hasn't had a return of it. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed Jill Blakeway and the interview we put together for you. If you're interested in her book, again, you can order that off of Amazon. If you're an Acubalance patient here in Vancouver, we do have a few copies of her book in our lending library, so you're invited and welcome to come down and borrow one of those books as well. Anyways, enjoy. Want to welcome everybody. My name is Lorne Brown. I'm a doctor of traditional Chinese medicine. I have a practice here in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. It's called Acubalance Wellness Center. Our website's acubalance.ca. And today I get to interview a colleague and a friend, Dr. Jill Blakeway. Jill is the founder of the Yanova Centers in the New York area, the state of New York. And she's also an author. Many of you that follow us for fertility know her from one of her first famous books, because she has more than one, called Making Babies. But today we're going to talk about energy medicine. Her latest book is called Energy Medicine, the Science and Mystery of Healing. And I have to share with you that a couple of years ago, Jill was just bubbling with excitement when she was telling me that she had this project to do this book and that she's going to be traveling around the world. And here we are today. The book is written, it's published, it is available in bookstores and online. And Jill, I just got a couple of questions for you, because you couldn't tell me a lot back then because of the contracts you had, but now you're ready to share all so we can find out a little bit more and go pick up copies of your book?
I am. I'm ready to spill the beans, Lorne. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm really happy to be here. And you're right, I remember that conversation. I couldn't tell you a great deal because I was under contract. HarperCollins gave me the most lovely, lovely commission, which was to, in some ways, explain me to me, or in fact, us to us, acupuncturists, and why we're so effective. Because, as you know, patients thrive under our care. And that's true true at Acubalance, that's true all across the world. And it's certainly true at the Unova Center. And so I set off on a journey that originally started to just explain me to me and us to us, and became a much bigger journey as I went around the world talking to healers and scientists and researchers who research into healing. And I began to realize that I was hitting on some large universal truths about the way we all connect. So I'm really excited to share this book. It was a sort of professional and personal journey. It changed me to write it. My editor tells me it changed her to edit it. And everybody who's read it so far has found the information sort of revolutionary. So I'm so happy to share it with people.
And, you know, our audience today is going to be both public and practitioners. You know, a lot of the people that follow this video feed are acupuncturists or naturopaths. So I'm going to do my best to get into the nitty gritty, the good stuff, because they're already like, yeah, we're believers. But I do know we have some public and skeptics. So I want to make sure that a little bit for everybody. I love the fact how you talked about this universal truth, because I really think there's this massive paradigm shift. And your book has come out. It's just amazing how this worked just at that right time, where people are like, hey, are the assumptions and how the universe works, how we heal, are they actually accurate assumptions? And I think your book shares that maybe we need to revise the assumptions after you've interviewed so many great healers. So I want to ask you the first question, just kind of from the research that you've done, the interviews and writing this book, how do we know that the body's energy field actually exists? Because we like to measure things. So is it actually measurable? Because a lot of people say it's nonsense. We can't measure it, so it doesn't exist. And you say different.
Well, yes, I do. I mean, for example, as you know, Lorne, doctors measure aspects of it the whole time. EEGs measure the field around our brain. EKGs measure the field around our hearts. We're beginning to understand that there are other fields around other organs. And there hasn't been a great deal of medical interest in measuring a unified field or how the fields around individual organs interact. And as you know, Lorne, that's kind of our area as practitioners of Chinese medicine. We're interested in how different systems interact with each other and how to bring them back into balance in relation to each other. So, for example, as part of this book, I had myself measured. I'm an effective acupuncturist. I don't think I'm particularly special. I think most of the acupuncturists I know are effective acupuncturists. I have 18 colleagues back in the office who do an awesome job at the Unova Center. But I wondered what was happening in my body when I was with a patient. So they fitted me up to an EEG of my brain and an EKG of my heart. And it turned out that when I go into that very meditative place I go into when I give acupuncture, my heart and my brain resonate with each other, which means that they go at the same frequency. And to do that, I have to slow my brain down quite a lot. And then interestingly, the patient's heart goes into resonance with my heart, which I think is very poetic and beautiful, but it's not actually woo. It's that the patient does that due to something called mirror neurons. They start to mirror me and my calm, and they start to go into resonance with me. And at that point, I believe the magic happens. I think there's a transfer of information when we make what's called that resonant bond, and that resonant bond can be measured. And in the book, I looked at lots of examples of that. For instance, at the University of Connecticut, they did an experiment where they put people in 2 separate MRIs, and when one thought healing thoughts about the other, their brainwaves synced up, which is actually that feeling that we have all had when we think about someone and they text us, which I'm sure you've had, Lorne. I've had that. Or in fact, because you're a practitioner, you've probably had this. You think about a patient you haven't seen for 10 years or something like that, and they're on your schedule the next week. And that is that kind of resonance that comes from intention. So I became fascinated by this. There's also research that shows that people's heart waves show up in other people's brain waves when they're interviewing, when someone's being interviewed, which I think is really interesting. And all of that can be measured, and there are people out there measuring it. And in fact, there are people out there measuring what happens when we all line up and start to think about the same thing. So at Princeton, for instance, in the engineering department, there was a lovely man, the Dean of Engineering, Dr. Robert Jarre, and I was lucky enough to meet him. He was elderly and he has subsequently died, but he had a grad student who wanted to design a machine to measure, to see if it could be changed by the human brain. And I don't think that Dr. Jean thought for a moment this was possible, but he thought it was a nice grad school project for his student. And of course she did. She pulled it off. And they developed what's called REGs, random event generators, that spit out random numbers due to decaying atomic material, in fact, although it doesn't matter that much why. And those numbers become less random in a way that's statistically impossible when we all face in the same direction. So to give you an example, Lorne, on September the 11th, they had random event generators all over the world at universities spitting out numbers back to Princeton. And on September the 11th, they started to come into line 4 hours before the planes hit the Twin Towers, and then stayed in line for the rest of that day, which was an example, I think, of kind of collective premonition, which is interesting because time, as you know, is not linear, and also a shared compassion. But what they found at Princeton, which I think is really important, is they found that we connect through love. And as you know, love expands, but we also connect through fear, and fear contracts. And it made me want to be very conscious about what I was putting into the world, because we are, in effect, in silent collaboration with each other, and we are changing our reality. I talked to physicists who told me that the world was a hologram. It's all in the book, but we are changing the way the future looks based on how we collectively feel and think. And that was something that I didn't expect to find when I set out to write this book, Lorne, and then I thought was massively important.
You know, and interesting, because I know some people will go, oh my God, because you mentioned as a group, as a collective, we have this resonance that we're putting into the field, and everybody's going to start being worried about what everybody else is thinking. Here's the good news. It starts, and you share about this in your book, it starts with you, yourself. You change your frequency, you change your vibration through your attention, thoughts, and then the end result is an emotion, and that frequency vibration, that's what you're putting into the field. And so I think a lot of this mindful work that's coming out today in consciousness and being aware is you're feeling triggered. You got that fear. You know, let's just call it love and fear. We'll make it a yin-yang, a polarity right now. And so when you're in that contraction, not feeling great, it's to become aware of it and then choose again, right? And you're going to talk about the different techniques and what people do in the book. But that's the choice we have now as humanity on an individual level, is when you're in fear, notice it and then change it and move it to gratitude, compassion, empathy, or love. Since you mentioned love, I know Bill Bankston is one, you have a whole chapter dedicated to him, and I recently interviewed him. And I don't want to give the punchline away because you ask him about energy and healing, and I know love's related to it. Can you share with our listeners what you learned from Dr. Bill Bankston and how he was using energy healing to cure mice? I'd love to hear a little bit more what's in that chapter and your time with Dr. Bill.
Well, I adore Bill. I love Bill, who is a true scientist and an extraordinary man, actually, and has displayed extraordinary fortitude with his research. But the short story about Bill is that he learned an energy healing technique from a psychic healer, and he decided to test it in the lab. And they took mice that were specially bred to have cancer, poor mice, and those mice invariably die on day 27. They inject them with, in this case, mammary cancer, and they die on day 27. And that's how they test pharmaceuticals. But Bill was able to teach even his most skeptical colleagues to do this technique, and the mice recovered. And I loved Bill's research because I think good science should be replicable. There isn't a great deal of mileage in studying a special someone somewhere who has a special gift. Do you know what I mean? I mean, science should help us understand our world and help us improve and heal people in this case. And Bill's science is impeccable. And he has done these mouse studies over and over again. And as you know, Lorne, because I know you've talked to him at length, he's also able to put that energy into cotton, which is very peculiar, and into cell medium. And at Brown University, they did experiments where they put the same frequency. He doesn't call it energy, he calls it information, because energy dissipates over a distance. And this doesn't seem to. So it's a frequency that carries information. And he put that frequency into cell medium, and then they put human cancerous tissues into the cell medium. And I saw Bill this week, actually, because he came to my book launch party, and I'm trying to remember, I think it's now made 67 genetic changes in human breast cancer tissue when studied, which is remarkable. So you're right, when I got to the end of the book and I had interviewed healers all over Japan, I'd been all over the world, I did a recap. When you're winding down a book, you do a bit of a recap. And I asked every single person that I'd interviewed, which was hundreds actually, what is this energy that heals us? And I asked Bill, and I expected Bill to talk to me about particle and wave and frequency and things like that. And instead he said, it's love, Jill. And I thought that of course, I was like, oh, thank you, because that is how I'm going to start winding down my book. But I thought back to those experiments in my clinic where the patient's heart had gone into resonance with my heart. And I realized it is. Bill also describes this as your body's healing is an autonomic response to need. We can all do it. Our bodies can go into resonance with other people. And then I don't think we pass information to the person being healed. I think they take it. I think for us, it's quite a passive thing in some ways. But yes, it's love, I think.
Love heals all. That's crazy. Love heals all. I've done quite a few retreats with the Joe Dispenza, and people that I've met there say, he talks about the particle versus the wave, but people that go into this place and we've seen spontaneous healing, they feel like they're embraced by this blanket of love. Like it's just so expansive. Everything's amazing. Everything's good. They don't care if they have cancer or not. Like they can't explain it. And the words they say is, it's just lovely. You just feel so loved. So I'm sure over the next decade or so, more is going to come out about this, because we've heard about the heart center and love. And with the advancement of Western medicine, we became very physical and on the five senses. And it's kind of that 360 degrees. We're going back to, you feel it in your heart, in your gut. We're starting to be able to measure these things. That's why we're able to believe it. We're able to measure it. And this brings me to some of the spectacular things you saw, because I've seen some spontaneous healing that, even though I've seen it, I still find it difficult to believe, because you get into your regular life and you're like, I can't explain this, right? So we're at this place right now where the world is flat, but a lot of people are realizing it's round, and they've even seen it maybe from the space station, but then they're back on Earth and like, no, it's flat. So I want to help be reminded through your work that the world is round, because it sounds quite exciting that it could be round. You went to Japan, and I think one of the healers you saw was Hiroyuki. Abe is the last name. Hiroyuki maybe is the first name.
Hiroyuki Abe, yes, who's a monk.
Hiroyuki Abe, the monk. And I want to hear about, because you talk, because he healed a child, right? That you got to hear about, right? Like a miraculous thing.
Yeah.
So can you share what's going on there? I want to hear it all. Let's go for it.
Let me tell you it all. I want to tell people it all because it was so fun. So I was introduced to Hiroyuki Abe by a professor at San Francisco State called Dr. Eric Pepper. And in the book, we say there are no, that healings that seem miraculous may just be healings that we don't understand yet, that there is an explanation. And one of the things that Dr. Pepper told me, he had done a lot of physiological testing on healers, which is why I got tested. But he said that the best healers he knew created a sense of safety, that people heal when they feel safe. And one of the healers that he recommended was this man, Hiroyuki Abe, who is a monk in Japan. And before I went, because, I ended up being in Japan for 6 weeks, but it's a long trip. So I wanted to make sure that this was going to be worthwhile. So I talked to a psychologist, a research psychologist in Israel. We chatted over Skype, and he had had a baby that was born blind. And he had Skyped with Hiroyuki Abe, and he was quite skeptical, but he and his wife had Skyped, and Abe had identified a medical problem in his wife that he couldn't possibly have known about. It wasn't visible. So they decided to take the baby to Osaka, which is where Hiroyuki Abe is. And they took the baby to the clinic every day, and nothing much happened, to be honest. And I think they were getting a little bit disappointed. And then on, I think it was the 5th day, they wheeled the baby out in a stroller, and he screwed up his eyes, and they realized that he could see. And when I talked to the psychologist in Israel, his name is Yuval, the baby could still see and was 4. So with that, I took off with my lovely husband Noah to Japan, and I spent quite a lot of time with Abe. He took a while to trust me. I think you know, healers worry about ridicule or being misinterpreted or being made light of. So we became friends first, which is actually rather fun. And I described that journey in the book. He allowed me to watch him work. And he was a remarkably talented healer. And what was interesting from our perspective as acupuncturists, Lorne, was that he was using traditional acupuncture points, but just putting energy into them. And he actually had a patient with frozen shoulder that he got me to needle. And as you know, there's a point on the front of the leg for frozen shoulder. So I put that in, and then he held my hand on the needle and put his own energy through the needle. And it was like nothing I've ever felt in my life. It was like a plane taking off. So he was remarkably skilled. And I went from there to Fukuoka, which is off the coast of Japan. It's nearer to South Korea, really, than Tokyo, to meet a yogi, Master Kawakami, who is quite famous in Japan. He was Mr. Japan in 1979. He was a bodybuilder, and then he decided to stop trying to build his outsides and work on his insides. And he has extraordinary mastery over his body, and he can put skewers through his tongue and all sorts of things, and through his neck. And in fact, researchers, and Dr. Pepper was part of this, I think, put him in an MRI and burnt his feet with lasers. And what they found is that his brain registers no pain, and he floods his body with endorphins. So he is in effect his own placebo, and I went into a placebo chapter from him because of that. But he was also a remarkable healer, and he had through discipline learned to expand his consciousness. So he was extraordinarily psychic. And the first time I met him, he didn't know anything about me at all. And he started to tell me about my childhood. And in the book, I describe, I sat there and thought, well, at some point, I'm going to work out how he does this. But right now, he's kind of freaking me out. So I spent some time with him, too. He was remarkably generous. He was a lovely, kind man. He's in his 80s. And I said to him at one point, Sifu, I'm going to come back and study with you, because he was a remarkable healer. And he said, well, don't worry, you have plenty of time. I'm going to live till I'm 110. And I thought, you know, I think he may be right. He was in great shape. So I set off on this journey to see these people who appeared to be creating miraculous spontaneous healings, but were in fact just very skilled and very disciplined in their bodies, and had learned to harness or create a bond, as Dr. Pepper says, by being very kind and warm and loving and creating safety, and then a resonance with the patient that allowed information to transfer. And we get glimpses of that when they're studied. Which I think is really interesting. We get glimpses of how they adapt their physiology in order to do that. And there are lessons to be learned, I think, for us as acupuncturists and other kinds of practitioners. And I put those lessons in the book, actually. There's a lesson at the end of each chapter, because one of the things I felt very strongly about at the end of this was that this isn't just for a few special people. There are people who have worked very, very hard to become very, very skilled. But this is free. We can all do this to, you know, a lesser or greater degree, depending on how much we want to focus and hone our skills.
It's all repetition and practice from what I've been learning. And again, I'm so thankful that you wrote this book and that I know you, so I can call you and just chat about this stuff, because the people you got, and I get to meet these brilliant healers that I wouldn't have access through your book. So thank you for doing this. I picked up the EEG, heart rate variability machine that Dawson Church in his book Mind to Matter discusses. So I have that. I have 2 devices so I can measure me and my patients. Because one of the keys that you were sharing about, anybody can do this, it just takes practice. So repetition is the key to get yourself into brain and heart coherence. And then, as you said, the patient in need will just pick that up because it's information that's being shared, and you just have to be into that state, put that out into the field, I guess, and people will pick that up from you. So it really is, I guess it's one of those things, it's simple, not easy. Simple. Anybody can do it. It does not require technology. It does not require high-tech anything. It's not easy because it requires discipline. The discipline, getting up and practicing every day to change those neural networks, that takes habit, takes effort, and that's why it's not so easy. But anybody can do it. Check out Jill's book because she has, at the end of each chapter, exercises that are simple to do. And if you do them on a regular basis, you'll change the wiring of your brain. It will become second nature, so you can do your own healing for yourself, hence heal thyself. Because you're an acupuncturist, that was, doctor of traditional Chinese medicine. That's kind of what got you into the healing field. I'm curious what you've learned about acupuncture and the research on does it work? Because some of the skeptics still question whether acupuncture works. I just had Dr. Magarelli, a reproductive endocrinologist, recording a lecture for Infertility Awareness Week. And he's like, no, acupuncture works. We don't always know why exactly, but we can measure it works. I'm curious from you as an acupuncturist and the work that you've been doing and through your book, what do you say about people that question whether acupuncture works or not?
Well, we can measure the physiological effects of acupuncture quite easily these days. MRIs can show brain changes because of acupuncture. Thermal imaging can show that it reduces inflammation. Doppler ultrasound can show that it increases circulation. MRIs can show that the acupuncture points themselves are different tissue. One of the things that I learned was I looked at the work of Helen Langevin at the University of Vermont, who, as you know, looked at the acupuncture points quite closely. And we already know from MRI studies that they look a little different, that they're more innervated and that they have a greater incidence of blood flow to them. But she actually looked at the pull force when you get duchy, is what we call it in Chinese medicine, the pull on an acupuncture needle. And she measured it, and she found out that the pull force at the acupuncture points was 20% higher than other places in the body. And in fact, by doing studies on rat abdominal wall, she showed that when the needle is manipulated, the connective tissue twists around it like spaghetti on a fork, and it stays twisted for the entire duration of a treatment, and it increases the electroconductivity of the point. So the points are already more electroconductive, and then what we do to them makes them more electroconductive. And then I looked at the work of Charles Shang, Baylor University, who looked at embryology to work out why these acupuncture points are more conductive. And one of the things that he found, and I think this is something we never think about, but embryos have to create themselves without a very good communication system. They don't have a good cardiovascular system. A lot of communication in the body is done through the blood, and they don't have a fully formed nervous system. Most of the rest of the communication in the body is done through the nerves. So they do it electrically. And you can actually go on Google or go on YouTube and look up electric frog face. And at Tufts, they showed a frog embryo developing, and it's like lightning going across its face. It's very cool. So embryos create electrical energy in order to generate. And they do that by creating nodes at various points in the body. It's like systems theory. It's like computer systems theory. And interestingly, the man who discovered this was the World War II code breaker, Alan Turing, in the UK, who discovered or came up with this theory of morphogenesis. And so the acupuncture, so the embryo creates these nodes. And if you look at where the nodes are, they are at the major acupuncture points. So it would seem that the acupuncture points themselves are used when we're embryos to generate the next bit of us, to bud off an arm or a finger or a nose. Then as we grow and we become people, they can be used to regulate us. And I still had some questions about how does the message from the acupuncture point travel deep into the body? And I think a lot of those get answered by Langevand's research into connective tissue. Connective tissue has a very high collagen content. Fascia is the most ubiquitous connective tissue in the body. It goes everywhere. It wraps our organs, and it is electroconductive. It's actually it also generates electricity, which is interesting. And so I think these the acupuncture signal is going deep into the body through the fascia. And actually, if you superimpose a map of the fascial planes over the acupuncture meridians, they are, of course, in the same place. Which I think is really interesting. So I spent a lot of time talking to Western scientists about electroconductivity in the body and how it's measured and where it goes and how it affects the body. And I dedicated an entire chapter to acupuncture because of that, because of course it is what I do every day. So it interests me.
And I really enjoyed your description there about how acupuncture works. And for those, again, the listeners, that YouTube video, the frog face, it's brilliant. And it reminds me, you know, as you said, you see all this electricity and then the physical gets formed. And so somebody once shared that Einstein, and I'm going to paraphrase it, so I'm not going to quote him perfectly, but it was him that said, it's not matter that creates the field, because we can measure things around physical objects. It's the field that creates matter. So we were going the wrong direction trying to measure things. So this kind of makes sense with that frog face video, that there's nothing, but there is electricity, this field, and then the matter shows up. And I think that's what's happening with your book, the title Energy Medicine. A lot of things that we do with healing, taking pills or supplements, we're using matter to change matter, and it can take time when you're in the space-time realm. It can, you know, it can take a while for healing. These spontaneous healings, that's when we're using energy, or we'll use Bill Bankston's words, information. We're using energy, information to change matter. And when you're in the time-space realm, time is infinite, so it happens instantaneously. And that's where you see miracles happening. And as you shared, miracles are just because we don't understand them yet. And we're working from the paradigm quite often that the earth is flat, so we don't understand them. But if we change the paradigm and the earth is round, it kind of makes sense. And so, again, your book is perfect timing for so many of us, because the literature that's out there, the talks that are happening, it's around this idea of love, information, this brain and heart coherence. It's kind of happening everywhere, and it's so nice to hear how you've put it. And as usual, you write so beautifully, and so thank you. I got one last question for you, if you'd be so kind. I'm curious, you're traveling, meeting all these healers. I kind of want to know, what did you learn? And in your book, you talk about you had your own experience. So has this book changed you?
Oh, it definitely changed me. It changed me as a practitioner, and it changed me as a human being. I met remarkable healers. I met remarkable scientists. I understood a little better what I am doing in clinic. I understood more the discipline it takes to do that well. I understood that we are all connected, that we are effectively all one, that we're individuated aspects of the same thing. And, you know, we are living in a very disconnected world, ironically, although we're all connected on the internet, but it's factionalized, and we're living in times that are cruel. And I learned that, you know, love expands and fear contracts, and that we must be brave now. We must not be fearful, and we have to pick love. And in our clinic, we say very regularly, what would love do? You know, how would love make this choice? And it guides my business. It guides my life. It guided this book. And at the end of this book, I tell the story. At the end of my time with Hiroyuki Abe, he asked me if I would like to have my chakras opened. And I took this a little lightly, to be honest. I had no idea that this was going to be such a big experience. And all of his students were amazed, because he rarely offers to do this. And I have footage, which when I see you next, Lorne, I'll show you, of him doing, opening my chakras. And I could feel him inside my body. I could feel him pulling. It took several minutes, and I opened my eyes, and all of his students were in front of me, lovely Japanese people in front of me, and all I could see was light shining from them. I could just see light. And in the book, this took me into a description of biophotons, because of course our cells emit light. And in fact, cancer cells lose their light, which is very interesting. But I suddenly saw us as energy condensed. You know, we are matter, obviously, but we're energy condensed, and that light reflecting back at me was suddenly the energy coming off people. And to be honest, from the moment he opened my chakras, I have never seen the world the same since. So it was extremely life-changing, and that's what I learned. We are effectively energy condensed into matter. We are light. And we are all the same light. And any attempts to factionalize us and separate us are come from fear, because love says we're all absolutely part of the same thing.
Jill, thank you very much. So for our listeners, Jill is the keynote speaker at the Integrated Fertility Symposium in Vancouver, BC, Canada, at the end of April. We have some of your books available for sale. Hopefully you'll have some time to sign them. I encourage a lot of you that are coming to the conference, go to your bookstore, go online, because we don't have enough copies for everybody, and especially if you want to get a copy signed. And you can check out more about Jill. You can go to her Yinova website. She has a couple of clinics, and find out what she's doing there. You know, Jill, again, thanks for writing this book. It's just so inspiring, because in my practice recently, in the last couple of years, I've changed how I practice. And your book, again, it reinvigorates, inspires. So I use my needles, people expect it, and I use it to help induce the parasympathetic, to help bring you from high beta waves down into that alpha and even theta. I use hypnosis in my practice, emotional freedom technique, EFT, Psych K, and then what we call Qigong, which what you refer to and I refer to as heart and brain coherence. And these are the techniques that I use now in my practice. And, you know, you have to get into that place of brain and heart coherence. And I benefit so much, and it makes me love to practice again so much more. So I loved it when I started, as we all do. And then we can burn out and we get tired. And there was a period where I felt a little like, should I still be doing this? And then coming back and doing energy medicine, it's just changed how I practice and how much I love to practice again, and allowing the patients to take what they need. And I just got to get myself into that nice heart and brain coherence, and using the acupuncture, as you described so beautifully how it works. So that holistic approach is just wonderful. So again, I just want to encourage everybody, check your bookstore, go online. The title is Energy Medicine, The Science and Mystery of Healing. There you go. There's a copy. Jill has her copy, and as we've shown on the video, you'll see pictures. You've seen pictures of the book as well, and a link to her websites. So, Jill, thank you very much. Again, I look forward to seeing you in Vancouver. I want to see the video of you being healed, and as usual, we'll have lots to talk about while you're in Vancouver. So, thank you again.
Thank you, Lorne. Much to catch up on when we see each other, but this was very fun. Thank you.